Hi, let's talk about marijuana. This was prompted by a ballot initiative in Utah, commonly known as Proposition 2, which claims to legalize marijuana for medicinal use. In reality, it's much deeper and more nuanced than that, which is why we're having this discussion. You should know that I am not funded by or endorsed by anybody. My views are my own, and I represent only myself. So here's an outline. First, we'll be going over what Utah's Proposition 2 is or claims to be. Secondly, we'll talk about some basic facts about marijuana that are often omitted from some people's discussion about this. Thirdly, we'll have a look at who is involved in the ballot initiative. And fourth, we'll examine the effects and implications of this proposition if it is implemented, and also the motives of the parties involved. So first, what is Utah's Proposition 2? Here it is, at least a screenshot of the first page of it, in part. It's titled the Utah Medical Cannabis Act. First section of it is about cannabis production establishments. You can see that it goes through in standard, or perhaps non-standard legalese, defining terms and so on with section numbers and all that. So it's actually somewhat readable. I invite you to check it out and to look at the full text of it. It's 28 pages long. But this would be an important step in being able to decipher this and verify claims that are made in this presentation and elsewhere, and be able to understand what this is really about and what it would do if it's enacted. I've included a link below. So what is in it? A typical summary of Proposition 2 will go something like this. It says, physicians recommend qualifying patients to receive a medical marijuana card, which entitles them to go to a dispensary and purchase up to a biweekly limit of marijuana plants and products. This means that growers, dispensaries, and consumption of medicinal marijuana would be allowed within state boundaries. What else does that mean? How would that look? How would that be implemented? Well, that's why we're having this discussion. That's why this is a blank page for now. But we'll be filling this in as we go throughout the remainder of this talk. First, we need to establish some basic bits of understanding that are often brushed aside. There are certain non-facts about marijuana that are promoted very commonly by those in particular who wish to have marijuana legalized for recreational use. And so some of these myths we'll be presenting here. Number one, it's not addictive. Number two, marijuana is not a gateway drug. Number three, it's not harmful. Number four, legal or illegal, people are going to use it anyway, so why bother with legalization or worrying about that? Just don't care. And number five, science shows that it's good for you, it's beneficial. All of these are highly misleading and deceptive, and I'm going to be going through them point by point. So first, marijuana is addictive. You can look this up on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website. There you can find links to studies that indicate that roughly 1 in 10 marijuana users becomes addicted. And for those who begin using it younger than the age of 18, that goes up to 1 in 6 users gets addicted. It's important to note that the clinical definition of addiction has been narrowed in scope significantly in recent years. We used to speak of people who had a problem with something as being addicted, but that's no longer correct. The clinical term, at least, is limited to those who literally cannot stop the use of the substance on their own without significant interventions. That's the nature of addiction. It carries many people to the grave. Many do not recover. And so bear in mind, this is not the same addiction that we used to talk about. Actually, there are different terms, and it's still kind of, the boundaries are still a little bit fuzzy, but this is what they say, is that's what addiction is. You literally can't stop. 1 in 10, so 10% of people who try it get addicted. 1 in 6 people who try it under the age of 18 become addicted. This blurb is from drugabuse.gov. Answering the question, is marijuana addictive? It says marijuana use can lead to the development of problem use, known as a marijuana use disorder, which takes the form of addiction in severe cases. So marijuana use disorder is inclusive of addiction. Use disorder, by the way, is clinically defined as something that where you can show significant adverse health outcomes that relate to the use of a substance. So we're talking about damage to a person's health here, which is inclusive of addiction. It goes on, recent data suggests that 30% of those who use marijuana may have some degree of marijuana use disorder. 30%, nearly 1 in 3. People who begin using marijuana before the age of 18 are 4 to 7 times more likely to develop a marijuana use disorder than adults. Not addictive, huh? It is addictive, and even for those who fall outside the realm of clinical addiction, of being unable to stop, there are still significant, measurable adverse health outcomes that affect a significant additional proportion of users, and it affects youth most strongly. takes the form of a developmental disorder. So by comparison, I would hope that we're familiar with the opioid addiction crisis. It's been going on for a number of years, wherein doctors prescribed opioids, which are opium-like substances, a family of opium-derived or synthetic opiate substances, were prescribed by doctors for management of chronic pain. However, as we can see here, in the middle bullet point, between 8 and 12% of prescription opioid patients develop an opioid use disorder. So that's 8 to 12%. Same clinical term as on the previous page of a use disorder. And we should bear in mind that this is a prescription case. This is not recreational. So even though these drugs are being managed and controlled by the doctor, there are misprescriptions, and the substance is still addictive enough that even those who are following their prescriptions are still at significant risk of developing a use disorder, which includes addiction, which, by the way, includes death. Many thousands of people have died from opioid overdoses in consequence of this. There's another example here. Alcohol. This little graphic here is from a Washington Post study. It highlights some of the statistics visually. From literature, we can discern that somewhere between 8 and 15% of alcohol users have a clinically diagnosed use disorder. Interestingly, statistics on alcohol addiction are actually somewhat sparse. I don't know whether very prominent alcohol companies might have paid off the national institutes in order to water down their language, but they do use a spectrum of different terms to refer to different conditions, most of which actually are referred to temporary statuses such as binge drinking and so on. Addiction is generally a term that's evaded in the alcohol literature for some reason. But we can get an idea for the scope and significance of this use disorder. Here, this infographic was included and assembled from studies used in the Washington Post. The little figures at the bottom are American adults, and there are 10 of them, so each one of these represents 1/10 of the American adult population. So 70% of American adults, these 7 here, are current drinkers of alcohol. 86% of them, 86% of all American adults have had alcohol at some point in their lives. Start up to here. But of these 70% now, and out of all American adults, we see this graduated incline of how many drinks per week an average person within this 10% cluster drinks per week. How many alcoholic beverage equivalents per week? And this top one is 73.85. Nearly 74 alcoholic beverages per week are consumed by the top 10% of American adults. That's more than 10 drinks per day. And so I think this shows brilliantly that there is no possible way that, given these statistics, that 10% of American adults are not perpetually inebriated. People who are under the influence of alcohol cannot drive legally. Their driving is impaired significantly. They cannot function well in the vast majority of employment. Perhaps any useful employment is out of bounds. They're definitely not maintaining stable, intact homes and family life, and they're definitely not having a good time. Many of these will actually go on to develop severe liver disease and other major problems and premature death. And so to claim that 10% of the population getting addicted to something is not a big deal, very clearly we can see here that 10% of our potential GDP, at least, is actually completely locked up and more than destroyed. You also have healthcare costs, by the way. You have the death toll of drunk driving or otherwise impaired driving, and numerous other costs to society, the cost of life to those who are themselves addicted and destroying their health and livelihood, the cost and burden on loved ones and caretakers, caregivers to these individuals, addiction recovery, treatment programs, like you name it. If there's anything that's driving homelessness and death and chaos and suffering in this country, here's a really good place to look. So this other types of substance addictions aside, this contextualizes the 10% of marijuana users get addicted. Food for thought. What I've seen proponents of recreational marijuana do most often is they will use anecdotal evidence and in order to support their theories and their claims, and they will simply ignore or reject statistics. It goes something like this. Well, I didn't get addicted, or maybe somebody doesn't want to admit that he uses a particular substance. My friends who use that substance, or people I know who use that substance, aren't addicted. Therefore, no one gets addicted to it. And this is a supreme logical fallacy. We can give them the benefit of the doubt and just say that they don't have a functioning rational brain, but more likely than not, they're actually just lying through their teeth because, in fact, as we have seen, 1 in 10 marijuana users does get addicted, meaning there is no way that he can get out of that without significant intervention. And remember also with youth, that is 1 in 6 users. So let's do a little visual here. This is akin to the incredibly stupid practice of playing Russian roulette. Horrible, horrible game, straight from the infernal pits. It causes tremendous suffering, no advantage, no benefit. There's a bullet in 1 of 6 chambers. People put the loaded gun to their heads. They spin the what do you call it, the cylinder, and put the gun to the head and pull the trigger. Now, 5 out of 6 players of this game, assuming nothing's rigged, makes it out alive, but 1 in 6 doesn't, or is hospitalized for the rest of his life, which is usually very brief after that incident. And I don't know that anyone's ever had a full recovery from a gunshot wound to the head of this manner. Anyway, stupid game. And yet, this is precisely the kind of logical fallacy that proponents of recreational weed are pushing. They're saying, well, I got lucky, it didn't fire on me, therefore it's not addictive. But the fact is, there's a bullet in chamber, and it fires. It completely ruins the life of 1 in 6 youth users, 1 in 10 population in general. And this is characteristic of the recreational drug use lobby. Their stance is to pretend that these people who are mortally wounded, addicted to these substances, they simply don't exist. That's what they have to believe in order to make the claim that it's not addictive. Is, oh, no one got addicted, or if they got addicted, it was their own fault. It's just a matter of choice. They can, well, if it were just a matter of choice, then they could get out of it now. It wouldn't be addiction. Addiction robs people of their ability to choose. They're no longer free once they are addicted. So it's an absurd fallacy. People who are addicted are routinely swept under the rug. These people who become homeless, these people who take their addictions to the graves all too often, and anyway, recreational lobby simply very often claims that they don't even exist. It's not addictive. That's what they're saying when they say it's not addictive. They say these people do not exist, but they do, and they suffer greatly because of this deadly game. Point number 2. Marijuana is very likely a gateway drug. This is from drugabuse.gov. It cites various studies, and it goes on to say these findings are consistent with the idea of marijuana as a gateway drug. However, the majority of people who use marijuana do not go on to use other harder substances. Also, cross-sensitization. Cross-sensitization, by the way, is the phenomenon that a substance heightens the response to or interacts very strongly with another substance. Marijuana is known to do this. It will heighten or magnify or amplify the effect of another drug. It increases the risk of overdosing and psychosis, schizophrenia, all sorts of other nasty side effects that can be that usually aren't included anywhere on a warning label. So cross-sensitization, they say, is not unique to marijuana. Alcohol and nicotine also prime brain for heightened response to other drugs and are, like marijuana, also typically used before a person progresses to other more harmful substances. So let's break this down. Consistent with the idea that it's a gateway drug, and these other substances are, like marijuana, typically used before a person progresses to other more harmful substances. So this is a blatant admission of the fact that it does have a gateway phenomenon. It seems that the watering down in the speech here is simply to say that, oh, there are other drugs that are also gateway drugs. Well, as before, look at this quantitatively. A drug does not have to be the premier gateway drug in order to be a gateway drug. There's another word that's used in here that is fairly wordsmithed. Majority. Majority simply means anything greater than 50%. Now let's think about this statement here. They say the majority of people who use marijuana do not go on to use other harder substances. Okay. To be fair, it would be a pretty strong statement that all users of a substance go on to use other harder substances, or that a majority do. That would be a very strong statement indeed. But all this means is that not greater than 50% of people who have used marijuana go on to use other harder drugs. I've included a link in the bottom here also to this drugwarfacts.org. They estimate the prevalence of Americans using illicit drugs as roughly 10 to 11% of Americans use illicit substances, of which hard drugs would be a subset. And so the population, the general population rate of people using these harder substances would be something less than 10 to 11%. However, with this other statement here, all we're saying is fewer than 50% go on to use other harder drugs. Compare that with fewer than 11% using hard drugs generally. And so what that means is using marijuana bolsters your likelihood of using harder drugs above a typical person who may or may not use marijuana by somewhere between 1 and 5 times the risk. That's really still quite a sizable, quite a large room for leeway. And incidentally, marijuana is the most popular illicit substance, so that 11% is likely much of that is accounted for by marijuana users. So it is a gateway drug. Has an amplifying effect of somewhere between 100% and 500%, or possibly greater, of increasing the likelihood that users will go on to use harder drugs. Number 3, marijuana is not harmless. It has known harmful effects. This is from drugabuse.gov. Marijuana overactivates the parts of the brain that contain the highest number of dopamine receptors. This causes the high that people feel. Other effects include altered sense of time, and I'm going to begin highlighting these and talking about them. Changes in mood. So marijuana the THC in marijuana is psychoactive, meaning it has the potential to rewire and damage your brain even permanently. This helps to explain why those whose young brains are still developing are particularly susceptible to a use disorder and to addiction to this substance. Changes in mood are regulated quite strongly by the dopamine chemical in the brain, which marijuana floods your brain with abnormal amounts, which your body's self-regulation, actually what it does is it will shut down the receptors of dopamine and also shut down the producers, such that a person who has used such hard drugs, it's hard in the sense that it's flooding your brain with chemicals to a dangerous level, such that your brain is now suppressing those chemicals. It inhibits the ability of that person in the future to produce and to sense dopamine, which means that, and dopamine is essential, people just don't feel good, they feel miserable whenever their dopamine is too low. And so the effect of this over time is that marijuana users will feel miserable all the time, unless they're high. And even there, they have to use more and more of the drug over time because their sensitivity to it decreases with time, as described. So this drastically affects a person's mood and has severe interactions with anxiety, medication, and antidepressants, and so on, with potentially life-threatening consequences. Another effect, impaired body movement, difficulty with thinking and problem solving, impaired memory, hallucinations, delusions, and psychosis when taken in high doses. And one of the things that the recreational lobby is not telling you about marijuana is that, in fact, marijuana is being bred for potency. The levels of THC in marijuana have something like quadrupled since the hippie era. And so somebody who used it back then and who tries some of this new stuff, garden variety even, is very likely to suffer much more extreme and intense adverse consequences, which increases the likelihood of hallucinations, delusions, and psychosis, and of severe addiction. So the stats we've seen on addiction so far are actually not indicative of this trend. That would be captured in future statistics, which I hope we never have to see. This is from drugabuse.gov. How does marijuana affect a person's life long term? Generally lower life satisfaction, poorer mental health, poorer physical health, and more relationship problems by self-reporting users. People also report less academic and career success. For example, marijuana use is linked to a higher likelihood of dropping out of school. It's also linked to more job absences, accidents, and injuries. So marijuana is harmful. Point number 4, fallacy number 4. People are going to use it anyway, legal or not. So this is from Vox.com. Recent research has found that pot use increased in states that legalized medical marijuana. So think about that. If people are going to be using it regardless of whether or not it's legal, why does legalization affect the number of people using it, especially medicinal marijuana legalization? This latest research disputes earlier studies that found no increases in teen pot use following legalization of medical marijuana. Drug policy experts argue these earlier studies were far less robust. They did not compensate for significant factors and so on, had other flaws. But this is the latest and best expert opinion on the subject. In fact, marijuana use does increase when you legalize, even at the so-called medicinal level. So, no, not everyone's going to use it if it's not legal. Debunked. Point number 5. Marijuana is good for you. It's not. This is from cdc.gov. Their section on marijuana use for treatment of various ailments. This subsection is chronic pain. It says, even though pain management is one of the most common reasons people use medical marijuana in the U.S., there is limited evidence that marijuana works to treat most types of chronic pain. A few studies have found that marijuana can be helpful in treating neuropathic pain caused by damaged nerves. However, more research is needed to know if marijuana is any better or worse than other options for managing chronic pain. So just a couple of things, saying there's limited evidence that marijuana works to treat most types of chronic pain. So clearly not a wholesale endorsement, clearly not an adjudication, a pronouncement that, oh yeah, it works, it cures pain. They do make this claim here that it may be helpful in treating neuropathic pain. However, they say essentially it's inconclusive. They don't know whether it's any better or worse than other options, and other options do exist that have lower addiction rates, and we should pursue such. So one other poster child of the recreational marijuana movement is a recent FDA, Food and Drug Administration, approval for low THC CBD oil. CBD is another marijuana derivative or component. It's for use of. It's been authorized for use in treating epileptic seizure patients. And this is a quotation from a press release issued by the FDA in that regard. They say, "This is an important medical advance, but it's also important to note this is not an approval of marijuana or all of its components. This is the approval of one specific medication for a specific use, and it was based on well-controlled clinical trials evaluating the use of this compound in the treatment of a specific condition. Moreover, this is a purified form of CBD. It's being delivered to patients in reliable dosage form through a reproducible route of delivery to ensure that patients derive the anticipated benefits. This is how sound medical science is advanced." We'll be revisiting this soon, but this is the primary objection that opponents of Proposition 2 have to it. They don't treat marijuana like a medicine. They completely sidestep these authorized scientific medicinal channels and resort to completely alternative and much harder to regulate methods that have in other states led overwhelmingly to the almost immediate adoption of recreational marijuana legislation. We'll revisit this soon. So to contextualize this FDA approval, one specific compound, one specific medication derived from one specific compound of marijuana for one specific use was approved. And approved doesn't necessarily mean the treatment's effective. It just means that they believe that in that one specific case, in that isolated compound, the benefits may outweigh the risk of harm. Remains to be seen. So this limited FDA approval, what is it really saying? So I'm incorporating some information here from a study that includes information about the medical conditions that medical marijuana patients registered under as their qualifying condition. Epileptic seizure patients accounted for fewer than 2%, so less than 1 in 50 of current medicinal users is even affected at all by this FDA approval of a specific medicine derived from a specific marijuana compounded marijuana plant. This is significant. Recreational marijuana proponents advertise and boast that marijuana contains over 500 natural compounds. Well, just because something's natural doesn't mean it's good for you. But of those, we found one that maybe might outweigh the harm for one specific, very specific and relatively rare type of patient. Fewer than 1 in 50 is affected by this at all. There's no known benefit to this day to any of these other patients, and in particular with respect to the chronic pain category, the studies have, as mentioned before, been inconclusive of any benefit to people with chronic pain in general, as well as in the more specific case, it's unknown whether it is any better than any other pain medications, while carrying with it non-trivial risks. And besides which, I don't know that they narrowed it down to any of the specific compounds. TBD. Also, the CDC maintains that there is no known safe amount of the psychoactive THC component, which is what people take in order to get high. No known medicinal use, and no known safe amount for anybody. So, here are the myths we've discussed. It's not addictive. Well, 10% of users are addicted. 30% of them have a use disorder, and 1 in 6 youth users is addicted. Life-altering. Potentially life-destroying. Not a gateway drug? Well, actually, it is correlated with other drug abuse. We just might not know exactly how strongly, because it is so correlated with other drug abuse that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to disentangle it with those other drugs and their effects. The claim that it's not harmful, well, actually, it impairs thought, memory, and motion, and it can cause psychosis in documented cases, and so it is harmful. Another note on this: a substance doesn't even need, even if these, let's pretend for a moment that it doesn't impair rational thought or moral judgment or memory or motion, or have potential to cause hallucination, psychosis, and other causing mood disorders and anxiety, etc. Let's pretend that all that isn't the case. The fact alone that a substance is addictive does cause harm to a person. It causes him financial ruin. It destroys his relationships with other people. It destroys his happiness and his ability to function and to pursue the life of his choice. He's no longer free. That's what addiction is. It's slavery. But in all these ways and more, it is harmful. People are going to use it anyway. Well, we debunk that. Its use increased with legalization, even of the medicinal variety. So people will not all use it anyway, regardless of whether or not it's legal. Some people very stupidly think they can get away with using it when it's illegal. They've got another thing coming. Science says it's beneficial. This is an extremely misleading statement, and it is thrown out there as though it is commonly touted by the recreational community as though it's gospel truth. Marijuana is good for you, no negative side effects or anything. But what we've shown is that the current state of medical science with respect to potential benefits of marijuana is that the FDA has ruled that there is one condition affecting a small percentage of current medical marijuana patients for which one specific compound in dosage form derived one specific drug in dosage form derived from one specific compound may be helpful. And so to claim that the whole plant or any other part of it is beneficial to you in general is outright bogus. So we have one question mark here. A lot more they have the burden to show, and so many users and yet So little science. But it's good for you, they claim. Okay, well, we've seen this before. You remember when the studies were published claiming that alcohol in moderation is good for you. A glass of wine a day is good for you. Well, okay, well, it turns out the grape juice is good for you, has health benefits. And so all that those studies really showed, if anything, is that grape juice is good for you. Okay, good. And grape juice is a component of alcohol, with some of the sugars fermented. That's kind of like saying it's not all bad. It's like saying there's water in the cannabis plant, therefore it can't all be bad for you. And then they, again, with their if any then all, and contrarily their if any then none, or if not all then none mentality. Anyway, it's an extreme absurdity. The CDC maintains to this day, based on sound scientific medical evidence, there is no known safe level of alcohol, consistent with their pronouncement of THC, and which is one of the primary addictive components in marijuana. So, no known safe level. All right, step number 3. Who's involved in the ballot initiative? There are those who are proponents of Proposition 2. We're going to highlight them here. Some of the major players are the Utah Patients Coalition. They're the ones who actually wrote and sponsored the draft that is now Proposition 2. You can go and read on their website or on the utah.gov legislature page. Their aim is to establish a medical cannabis program for sick and suffering Utahns. All right. So they're clearly, based on their name, they're a coalition of patients and patient advocates and others who care about people with, ostensibly, hopefully legitimate medical needs. They want good care for them. This is a good point to mention this. Todd Moon, he was actually the author of the original draft that they used as their concept to kickstart this whole Proposition 2. However, Todd Moon, his son suffers from epileptic seizures, and he's been looking for treatment for that. And so in desperation, turning to marijuana, wrote up this draft, and then Utah Patients Coalition devises their own alternative. Todd Moon, interestingly, no longer supports Proposition 2, because in his own language, they removed safeguards and regulatory control, regulatory oversight that should accompany actual medicine. So all that's been removed. That's been removed in Proposition 2, according to some of the originators, interestingly, of the medical marijuana movement in Utah. Utah Patients Coalition is allied with, affiliated with the Marijuana Policy Project, whose flamboyant slogan is "We change laws." They have vowed to gain power in legislatures in order to their global mission is make marijuana accessible to people. That's what they want to do, and they actually have a sizable recreational lobby, and so here they are supporting this so-called medicinal marijuana. Truce Together for Responsible Use and Cannabis Education. They are somewhat similar to the Utah Patients Coalition, consisting of some people who are afflicted with some manner of disease that they think may possibly benefit from the use of marijuana medicinally. And then you also have Libertas Institute, which basically their philosophy is freedom. At least that's what they say. Freedom. We want people to be free to do whatever they want, and paying the consequences. So these are some of the big names, those who are promoting Proposition 2. Libertas Institute, very interestingly, is very much pro recreational marijuana legalization, as is the Marijuana Policy Project. And these are two national organizations that are backing the Utah Patients Coalition in this, interestingly. Some of the opponents of Proposition 2 include the Utah Medical Association, the Utah Hospital Association, the Utah Sheriff's Association, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Utah Society of Anesthesiologists, and the Utah PTA, Utah Narcotics Officers Association. Common theme in all of these is actual medical professionals and law enforcement and persons of religion and people who are parents of children and in education are very much against Proposition 2. Why? We can go more into this at another interval, but one of the very common claims against everyone here is that, one very prevalent claim made by proponents of Proposition 2 is that all of these lack compassion. That's clearly not the case. I mean, here we have people who are keeping our community safe, people who are educators, people who are religious, good, moral people, and they are trying to make society better, not worse. Incidentally, going back to the subject of recreational use, this is what those who claim that marijuana is not addictive, they have their foot in their mouth right here, because claiming that opposition to what is effectively recreational marijuana legalization and is backed by many proponents of recreational marijuana, claiming that opposing that is uncompassionate, because there are some people who suffer, and some small percentage of them might maybe actually benefit from some portion of this plant. I mean, how far out on the limb do you have to go? I mean, where these people are ignoring outright the 10% of users, of recreational users of this substance who are addicted. That's not very compassionate. So there's misinformation here, mislabeling But here are the folks who are against Proposition 2, and they actually formed a coalition to oppose Proposition 2 and educate people about what's in it and find a better way to help those in need. It actually works. Okay, so who's affected? Residents of Utah and people in other states. Obviously, if we have more people doing marijuana here, medicinally or otherwise, it's going to affect our own people, it's going to affect our kids, it's going to affect people in other states, particularly neighboring states. People are very anxious to see the green wave, so-called, reach Utah. So this brings us to our fourth and final point, effects. What will be the effects of if Proposition 2 passes, and of these people who are involved, why are they involved? We'll go into more detail. This right here is an excerpt from the Curtin McConkie Memorandum. Curtin McConkie is a law firm who was commissioned by the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to examine simply what would this do? What would Proposition 2 do if it were implemented? And here's just a very brief excerpt of their findings. This is not a comprehensive summary. We can treat that on another occasion. But just to look at a few things of their findings. They say, the marijuana initiative will allow some people to grow their own marijuana. If they're more than 100 miles from a cannabis dispensary, they'll be allowed to grow up to 6 cannabis plants for personal medical use. And interestingly, nothing in the initiative allows the state to license or monitor homegrown marijuana operations. This, you can already see why law enforcement agencies are opposing Proposition 2. There is no effective way now to distinguish or monitor legal from illegal operations or to curb their growth in many situations. Second point, the marijuana initiative will allow people who grow their own marijuana to evade purchase and use limits. So obviously, if you have a prescription medication, you don't want people having overuse of it. Just think of the implications of that in the opioid crisis. If you misprescribe and you give someone too much of an opiate, people are extremely sensitive to these chemicals, to these drugs, and so overprescribing and so on it's going to have very adverse effects. But nothing in the initiative prevents a person who is authorized to grow his own marijuana from consuming more than the allotted amount, 2 ounces, which is a sizable amount of marijuana every 2 weeks. Consuming more than that from his own homegrown plants, which can be very large, no size limit, or from also buying the maximum amount from a dispensary. So this guy can, medical marijuana cardholders can be consuming inordinate amounts of marijuana without any restriction or regulation or oversight and no accountability to their doctors. There's a problem here. The marijuana initiative will create significant challenges for law enforcement, in addition to those mentioned above. We see no reason why a cardholder could not keep a label identifying that it was originally sold from a licensed cannabis dispensary, keep a label for marijuana bought legally, and show it to law enforcement to justify possession of illegally purchased marijuana. Just do a quick label swap, and they could have an infinite inflow of illegal marijuana. No way to tell. The marijuana initiative requires medical marijuana to be sold through marijuana dispensaries, which are these newly created entities, which, by the way, the initiative defines as a marijuana dispensary is a person who possesses marijuana and who intends to grow it and who intends to sell it. That's the definition. Go look it up in the Act. That's the definition of a marijuana dispensary. Anybody who has marijuana, intends to grow it, intends to sell it. Not licensed pharmacies. Okay, so no necessity of real medical expertise in the marijuana dispensaries. They're not treating it like medicine. They're treating it like some completely different animal, and there are very, very dangerous ramifications of this and very clear, pretty spelled out motives for us here. So it would be sold without prescription and outside of licensed pharmacies. The only serious controlled substance in Utah, sold for alleged medical purposes without a prescription. So you're not treating it like medicine. What gives? If it's medicinal, let's just go through medicinal channels. Also, the marijuana initiative allows patients to get a recommendation from a physician based on a one-time visit. The physician in other states that legalize medical marijuana, prescribing physicians typically have no prior relationship with the applicant patient and often know nothing more about the patient than what the patient discloses during a single visit. Anonymity. Lack of follow-up, lack of oversight. You're beginning to sense why this doesn't have appropriate medicinal controls. Also, nothing in the marijuana initiative prevents a patient from going to a different physician every 6 months to get a renewal recommendation. Again, that anonymity problem. Runaway abuse is what that spells. Also, the marijuana initiative will allow a small number of physicians to give a large number of recommendations. This is not speculative. At one point in Colorado, 70% of the recommendations were written by fewer than 15 physicians, and severe and chronic pain, a catch-all category, accounted for 94% of all reported conditions. And remember, there is no conclusive evidence, scientifically, medically, that marijuana even helps with chronic pain. Some people suggest it might, but the evidence to back that just isn't there. Again, the problem here, just a handful of runaway rogue physicians writing the majority of their recommendations. All right, so that's all I'll be going over from the Curtin McConkie analysis. I invite you to read the full text of it. It's only 7 pages, large font. It'll be linked below as well. Excellent study. But even it does not uncover all of the loopholes in this Swiss cheese proposition, ballot initiative. This little section I've titled Fahrenheit 750. Curious title. This excerpt is directly from the Utah Medical Cannabis Act, and it reads as follows. It is not lawful for a medical cannabis cardholder to smoke cannabis or to use a device to facilitate the smoking of cannabis. All right, great news. Awesome. They can't smoke it, right? That should make us happy, right? An individual convicted of violating the section is guilty of an infraction. For purposes of this section, smoking does not include a means of administration that involves cannabis combustion at a temperature that is not greater than 750 degrees Fahrenheit that does not involve using a flame. So a little bit of the background here in physics here. Marijuana does actually combust at temperatures below 750 degrees Fahrenheit. And it can be ignited using a standard automotive cigarette lighter, which is electrical, and not using a flame. So what this means is you could have a law enforcement officer accosting a man, finding a man who is smoking a joint of marijuana out in the street, anywhere in public, and the man could say, well, hold it, cool it, I have a medical marijuana card. And the cop says, but you're smoking it. And the man says, well, you can't prove that this was ignited at a temperature greater than 750 degrees Fahrenheit. It's actually slightly cooler than that. And you can't prove that I used a flame to do it. You can see the challenges for law enforcement. But here, just in front, up in green here, this is what they want you to see. Oh, it's not lawful to smoke it. Okay, great, move on. This is what somebody who only skims the proposition is in danger of coming away with. But looky here, they just redefine smoking. For purposes of this section, smoking does not include smoking marijuana. They just redefined smoking, and this is deliberate and intended to make law enforcement much harder. So, and Proposition 2 is riddled with numerous of these loopholes, very curiously worded things that from the start look like, oh good, they're doing due diligence, oh good, they have security, oh good, they're licensed, it's all legal now, it's all proper. But you look at the fine print, and you look at the way that cash can flow, you look at the way that the ways that people can now justify their deeds and make illegal usage look like legal usage, make the two indistinguishable. This is very clearly an initiative bent on blurring the lines, as in other states that legalized recreational marijuana very shortly after medicinal. Overwhelming trend. Another just peculiarity here. It's not lawful for a medical cannabis cardholder to smoke cannabis. I don't know. Could be speculation here, but why do they say a medical cannabis cardholder rather than person? Anyway, it's full of Swiss cheese. It's full of holes. So here, we're getting now into, we've gone from effects now, and we're going to motives. What motivation do people have for supporting Proposition 2? I've gone door to door, talked with easily over 60 people face-to-face on this subject. A number of them are for Proposition 2. Some of them claim that they want Proposition 2 to pass because compassion. Passion for patients. That's their aim. However, a sizable number, perhaps even more than those who are interested in compassion, at least nominally, were interested in supporting the movement, admittedly, because they are for recreational marijuana. Now let's think about that. If my sample size is at all representative, 50% or more of advocates, proponents of Proposition 2, want it because they want recreational weed legalized. Look at the dangers here. Look at what they can smell. See if you can sense where this is going. So this is from an article in National Institutes of Health, NIH.gov, talking about the interaction between medical and recreational marijuana legalization. It says, you have companies that are in the medical marijuana space now because they perhaps are looking to go into the consumer space, recreational, down the road. And then you have your truly medical marijuana companies. So, you know, the good guys who just want it for medicinal use, but this study highlights several that were interested very openly, in fact, in recreational legalization. Quote, we will clearly be on the recreational side also, says Dennis Arsenault, CEO of Organigram. All right, so there you have it. The medicinal is intermingled with recreational users, and recreational users wholeheartedly support medicinal marijuana, but not necessarily vice versa. So when you have medicinal marijuana legislation, the recreational users want it. Why? It wouldn't make what they do legal, would it? Or would it? Or would it make it easier for them to get away with it? So there are clearly more than two sides. Ultimately, there are more than two different parties involved. You have the people who are for Proposition 2, at least nominally because compassion. You have people who are for Proposition 2 because recreation. And you have people who are against Proposition 2 because it is, in fact, not a compassionate solution and enables recreational use. And I believe there's a better way. It's not that they lack compassion. It means they're more likely to have compassion. All right. So this is from stgeorgenews.com, an editorial by a concerned citizen, saying, many of the proposition's sponsors are undoubtedly seeking relief for legitimate sufferers, just like we said. But ask yourself why so many previously unengaged people have suddenly become advocates for those with debilitating illnesses. All the cries of lacking compassion and so on in our part. These are the very people who want recreational legalization, by the way. Going on with the quote. Would these advocates of convenience be there if relief were available through a more traditional source? And I'll answer that no. They never have been there. They aren't there. If there's a substance that is not addictive, not a recreational drug, and there is some leverage, some potential for compassion, you will not find these guys there. You will not find them supporting that. You will not find them being champions of it. The only reason they are here is because they know that this will make it easier for them to get away with their recreational addictive scheme. So who is behind Proposition 2 today? Well, when it started, you had the compassion lobby who said, well, we're desperate. Like, we understand that, like, vast majority of patients probably don't actually, we don't know what the medical science is, but we see a ray of hope because the FDA said there may be one component of it that may be good for one condition. And so compassionate people say, well, they ought to be able to at least try it and advance medical science, hopefully, right? And so these are the guys who wrote the, at least this is the Utah Patients Coalition is the group that wrote the draft of Proposition 2. Todd Moon, with his earlier draft, he was legitimately seeking compassion. But then, what do you have? Aha, somebody smells the smoke. Big marijuana rushes to the scene, and to be frank, I don't know of a single, maybe I shouldn't use those strong terms, but a great many recreational supporters are also in favor of medicinal marijuana. Why? They weren't interested in compassion before, when I was talking to them face to face about the people who suffer from addiction, they claimed they don't exist. So why the selective compassion? Why champion these people compassionately, supposedly, but not others? It's a big lie. So recreational users, big marijuana addiction industry, those are the guys who are largely behind it. And guess what? People like Todd Moon and others who were originally in it for the compassion say, I'm going somewhere else. I don't want anything to do with this. I want people to get real help, not make millions more victims by addicting people. So there's a conflict of interest. Here's just a little slide. Caption says, there's a doctor giving a prescription to a patient. Try this. I just bought 100 shares. So let's talk business here for a moment. Let's talk about the ideal product for somebody who's lazy, who doesn't want to work, who doesn't want to contribute good to society, who doesn't want to help people, who just doesn't have any morals or ethics, and who's not compassionate. He just wants to make a quick buck and keep on raking in the dough as long as he lives. What would the ideal product for such a person consist of? The ideal product to sell? Well, something that everybody needs every day. Costs pennies to make, sells for $1 or more. And no further development, scientific research, or product improvement, or any such bothersome effort to improve the quality of life for people will ever be needed. No customer satisfaction effort required, right? You just push a button, and this machine just starts cranking out money for you every day without paying any particular care to whether it's actually making anyone's lives better. This sounds like Coca-Cola, a certain company that we have more than a 100-year track record with. Just very briefly on the history of Coca-Cola, it started out in late 1800s as actually a snake oil merchant. So if you're not familiar with snake oil merchant, Google it. Basically, you have these charlatans who are self-proclaimed medical experts. And basically, they'll throw in random and addictive ingredients into some very often poisonous concoction, and then go around marketing it to housewives and everybody who would take a bottle of it, and with all kinds of outlandish claims, such as, oh, this cures indigestion, it will improve your appetite, it will get rid of headaches, it'll cure gout, it will, all these ridiculous, unsubstantiated claims, just trying to sell a wonder drug. That's what Coca-Cola is. The coca comes from cocaine, which originally was included in significant amounts, large amounts in Coca-Cola. It still is made using the coca leaf, but with the cocaine mostly already extracted. And cola, also a caffeine-containing product. Both of these substances are very addictive. And Coca-Cola's campaign was to give out lots and lots of coupons for free samples, and overnight they had 1 million users. And I can tell you what, it wasn't the flavor that got them. So we have this track record. We know this too from big alcohol, big tobacco. Basically, anybody who's unethical and who wants to make a buck will try to do it using addiction. So they find out something's addictive, they want to market it. I wonder why. So who's using it? This chart is from Marijuana Business Daily. What a name. It's a breakdown, practically, of what are the qualifying medical conditions that different medical marijuana patients are registered under over a number of different states. We don't have information from every state, but for the ones we do have, this is what we have. Interestingly, you look at this. This is the figure that we pulled the information from earlier. Seizures in epilepsy patients, 1.8%. This is the group to which the FDA approval applies, and none of the others. There's no known benefit of marijuana to PTSD patients, to cancer patients, to severe nausea patients, muscle spasm patients, etc. So only one of these has been affected by the FDA claim. And yet, look at the size of this graph. Look at the way that it's portrayed and presented. And now I'm going to quote some text from the article accompanying this chart of the week from Marijuana Business Daily. It reads, adding chronic or severe pain to the list of qualifying conditions for medical marijuana has a huge impact on the size of a given market and revenue expectations. Do you think maybe they're trying to strong-arm medical science into adopting something purely by reason that it will be lucrative to them and their investors? conflict of interest. Here's another chart. This is from the Marijuana Policy Project, one of the organizations that is national and strongly behind Utah's Proposition 2. Okay, it's a map of the United States. It's all green, and it's light green down to dark green. They portray this as a continuum, as a spectrum, where the lightest green states, Utah included, is where marijuana is fully illegal. Next darker shade of green is where it is decriminalized. Next darker is where it is legal for medicinal use. Next darker is where it's medical and decriminalized, and darkest green is where it is legalized. You notice the West Coast plus Colorado plus some of the northeastern states where very liberal politics are in full sway. Those are the places where you have full-on marijuana, recreational marijuana legalization. One of the interesting things, one of the very telling things about this graphic is that they choose to view it as a spectrum. Now, if we're doing medical science right, then medical marijuana really shouldn't be any closer to recreational marijuana than if marijuana were just illegal outright, because we're assuming that we have safeguards and controls over substance to prevent abuse, right? So then why does the Marijuana Policy Project view it as its sworn duty to support these medical marijuana initiatives? Well, you can go online and you can find the statistics for which states adopted medicinal marijuana and how quickly recreational marijuana followed. It is a poisoning by degrees, and the business, marijuana business, and marijuana business daily, not weekly, and the Marijuana Policy Project are both very much trying to appeal to investors who want to spread the green in order to get a lot of green. Here's a question I have. What proportion of medicinal users are now recreational? I've searched for this, found only crickets chirping. This is a point on which little, if not nothing, is reported. And yet it would be a very interesting subject of study moving forward. One positive point that many people claim exists surrounding Proposition 2 and medical and recreational marijuana legalization nationwide, and this is based on a Washington Post article. It claims that if we were to legalize medical marijuana in every state, then we could impose taxes on that marijuana, and that could generate $132 billion in tax revenue annually, legalizing recreational marijuana in every state. Plus, we'd have 1 million new jobs. Sounds economically fantastic, doesn't it? Well, maybe it does until you look at this chart from drugabuse.gov. This is the annualized cost, attributable cost, and estimates thereof, consequent from various drug abuse patterns. Tobacco costs us $168 billion a year annually in healthcare alone, overall $300 billion. That's from a 2010 estimate. Alcohol, $27 billion in healthcare, but $249 billion overall. Interestingly, alcohol users might be a lot less likely to seek healthcare. They might not regard it as a problem or whatnot. There may be a number of reasons, but lost productivity, lost lives, and so on. At least $249 billion a year. Illicit drugs, $11 billion in healthcare, $193 billion overall. Look, a lot of these people aren't presenting for health care, but they're costing us an awful lot. So if we continue to promote this mindset that is harmless, it's addictive, but it's harmless, or whatever, it's not addictive, pretending that it's not addictive, there are tons and tons of hidden costs that come with every one of these drugs. Prescription opioids, healthcare costs, $26 billion, overall $78.5 billion estimated cost. So now tell me, where is this $132 billion in tax revenue going to go? Well, predictably, most, if not absolutely all of it, is going to be totally absorbed and overtaken even by the cost of just trying to mitigate harm for legalization of this harmful substance. Think about this. Do we really believe that a recreational habit that has no productive benefit and no health benefit, do we really ourselves believe that this is going to be good for society? Money changing hands doesn't produce anything. The fact that something is taxed does not constitute production or wealth or growth. We are going to see a lot more of homelessness. We're going to see a lot more devastated homes, devastated lives, and the recreational lobby is going to continue to turn a blind eye to it if we legalize recreational marijuana at national or even local level. And medicinal, so-called, is a stepping stone in the eyes of the recreational lobby themselves. So, in summary, what are the parties involved here? So you have big marijuana and other companies that are seeking for power, for money, and faked or misinformed compassion. Frankly, those who are supporting Proposition 2 on the basis of compassion are duped. And I invite everyone to read the content of the proposition itself, as well as the content of the Curtin-McConkie memorandum, the legal analysis, and open your eyes. Open your eyes to the facts about marijuana. It is addictive. it is harmful. The FDA only approved continued trials and a medicinal form of one compound of present in marijuana for one type of patient. I mean, anybody who believes that this is some kind of a medicinal revolution is deceived, unless he's thinking of it in terms of we're now going to have a lot more medically adverse side effects coming out of this. And then you have those who oppose Proposition 2, who are generally motivated by doing what's right, keeping addictive drugs out of the hands of people, because once they're hooked, the agency excuse doesn't fly. They can't choose anymore once they're hooked. We want to keep good medical science and safeguards against drug abuse. Hence the law enforcement and medical professionals who are against Proposition 2. And we're interested in actual compassion. We have compassion for those who suffer from a variety of illnesses, every kind, including those who are addicted. The recreational lobbyists who are for Proposition 2 lack compassion for those who are addicted by not even acknowledging that they exist. And they slander and pour out hate against those who are against Proposition 2 and who want to find cures and treatments for those who are suffering, and do so in an ethical and responsible and scientific way rather than promote more suffering. So who's got the actual compassion here? Here are just some links to the resources, legal analysis of the Medical Marijuana Initiative. Here's an excellent site that publishes follow-up on what's happening where marijuana has been legalized, consequences. Truthaboutprop2.org reveals some additional loopholes, and they have some really great videos you can go check out. And there is a compromise on the table in the Utah State Legislature, which aims to legalize medicinal marijuana, but without all of the recreational loopholes, without the bad science. So what does this mean for us? Again, two major messages issued by proponents of Proposition 2. To the masses, they say compassion, relief, and freedom. To investors, they say money, 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 and it's addictive. So you'll never have to please your customers. Thanks for watching. This has been a candid conversation about marijuana as applied to the Utah Proposition 2 ballot initiative. Thank you.